Welcome. Happy Thursday morning. Everybody looks a little sleepy. I know I'm a little sleepy. Yeah. No? Okay, he says no. We're awake. We have energy. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming to my talk that just disappeared. There we go. It's back. So I'm Mary Luther. I'm a UX designer at Unity. I've been working on the editor redesign for the past 2 years. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more today. So today specifically, I'm going to talk a lot about the theming effort in 19.3. There are 4 parts. First, I'm going to talk about the problems. What?
Just keep going.
Okay. I'm getting adjusted, guys. Yeah. He told me to keep going, but how do you keep going? Okay. So first, I'm going to talk about the problems that prompted the update. Second, I'm going to talk about the strategies and the processes we use to address the problems. And then third, I'm going to talk about the work we did to improve theming in the editor. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the end results. So first, we're going to talk about the problems that prompted us to rehaul theming in the editor. In 19.2 and earlier releases, we had a lot of issues related to theming, many of which users told us about in the forums and in other feedback channels. We had a strong evidence it was time to overhaul the look and feel, but we needed to learn more. So we started by running a series of user studies to learn in a really data-driven and unbiased way, because we were hearing lots of different types of feedback all over the place. There were a lot of issues, but for the main kind of buckets that we ended up going into, there were 3 main areas. So first, this issue of the editor being really dated, and that actually had larger implications we'll talk about in a minute. The second one was focus being unclear, which is this minor thing, but as everybody can remember from past versions of Unity, kind of getting lost and accidentally making edits you didn't intend to on the wrong game object, etc. And then third, there were a lot of quality issues just throughout the product, so inconsistencies, right, everywhere. So we're going to look at an example of each type of problem so that it's a little more solidified. So issue 1, dated. We learned that users found the project to be outdated. The look and feel of the editor hadn't been addressed in over 14 years. So it wasn't a surprise that it felt dated, right? So we interviewed users. We found out that the bigger implication of this is that people, when they entered the Unity editor, they felt uninspired. They also felt like that maybe that it was a low-quality application or that it hadn't been recently addressed and it wasn't like supported currently as much because it looked a little bit out of date. So it didn't really also inspire people to start creating. This is an example of just one part of the UI that's pretty evident where this is happening. It's really dated in the application toolbar. So this is at the top of the editor. It's easy to look at this kind of thing and kind of wonder how all the amazing content that you guys make came out of Unity. Sort of a little bit of a disjoint between all the awesome runtime content and kind of what the editor is looking and feeling like. So I want to share 2 quotes from user study participants. We have a ton of quotes like this, but for today I'm just going to share 2 that really kind of give you a flavor of what people were telling us. 1, when using Unity today, it's really disappointing, depressing. So this is from a game designer. And then the second one, my overall impression of it is that the UI is very dated, reminds me of early 2000s for 3D program. The colors and the gray is not up to date. I'm not judgmental as long as it does what I needed to do. But the windows around it are overwhelming. I wouldn't even know where to start here. So obviously, we didn't just listen to the information we wanted to hear. We really took it hard and listen to all of the negative feedback so that we could really get this opportunity to make the Unity editor better. So this leads us into our second major problem. The focus was unclear. The editor was extremely busy, especially when you had to install all your various tools in Windows. It was hard to keep track of your context. We often observed users getting disoriented while trying to complete tasks between multiple windows. So for example, in user studies, we don't really lead people. We just give them a couple tasks to do. So some are sort of new user tasks, and some are more advanced power user tasks. And it's not really about the task or whether you can complete it. It's more about everything that we observe happening while you're trying to complete the task. So one of the things we observed over and over is people forgetting where their focus was. So everybody's had this old-timey experience, right, of not knowing which game object is selected in a really busy hierarchy and a really busy whatever. Then you modify your inspector, you've accidentally modified the wrong thing, and then you're trying to fix it and all of that stuff. And so a lot of that was coming from just not realizing which window was in focus. So if you think about, you've got hierarchy, you've got project, maybe you've got timeline open, and just kind of editing the wrong thing was pretty common. So the third problem was just all of the quality issues. There were so many inconsistencies related to theming that were causing also usability issues. One issue you can see in the inspector, the drop-down text in 19.2 and previous was 6 pixels. 6. So for most people, that's very difficult to read. Now, there is a subset of superhumans known as the 18 to 20-year-olds that can read 6 pixels. But for the rest of us, it can be really difficult. So that's one example. And it's also just not accessible. So obviously, the text in Unity is really small anyway. It's 11-pixel text. So getting that a little bit larger would be good as well. But the first step was just to eradicate any text that was absolutely ridiculously tiny. So we knew what the problems were that we wanted to solve, but how would we fix them? We worked to define what we needed to do, the process of how we would do it, and the principles that would guide us. So this is where we get a little bit like designy, Anya. We needed to be done, we knew what we needed to do. Yeah, sorry, this is a question. What did we need to do to fix the problems? So to solve the first problem, we needed to update the look and feel of the editor to kind of get rid of those uninspiring, dated, feedback issues. And this included updating the fonts, all of the icons. The other thing we needed to do was add support for high DPI icons because more and more people are on 4K and Unity was not looking great there. And then we also needed to, the second one, we needed to make the UI more clear, and we needed to develop a new method for styling the editor. We also knew we needed to fix a few core interactions along the way. For the third problem, we would need to create a clear set of guidelines to help Unity engineering teams and asset store developers improve consistency. But how would we prioritize everything, and what would guide our decision making? So we kind of developed these principles. So Unity as a company has a set of principles, and these kind of feed directly into those, but they're a little bit more specific as they apply to the design of the editor itself. The principles we needed to work on were users first. The solutions are guided by user feedback and data. This issue of modern, we need to provide a quality user experience that feels familiar, and we're going to move on to familiar here. The UI is consistent with other common applications. So we know as Unity users, you don't just have Unity open. It's not the only program you're working in. There's a lot of other modern apps that you have open at the same time working in conjunction with Unity. And so it's really important that things like keyboard shortcuts and things like this don't trip you up as you're switching back and forth between like Visual Studio, Unity, stuff like that. And then it needs to be accessible. That really just means it needs to be as highly usable by as many people as possible, and then efficient. So tasks and workflows are clear and efficient. And then, of course, inspiring. Users feel inspired, and then the more important one, unlimited. Users feel unlimited. So how did we work through these challenges together? What was our process? The team was actually comprised of UX design, UX research, engineering, and product management. We started with user feedback to identify a problem area, and then that led us to developing the core questions we wanted to ask with user research. Then we would validate those issues and kind of learn more so that would drive our solution making. This included doing interviews, studies, surveys, all kinds of stuff. Using the research findings, we would then do a design and technical development cycle. and we would ideate on the possible solutions. After that, we would prototype or build a solution and take it back to users for feedback before starting the iteration process again. So we probably did this like hundreds of times throughout the past year. What I think we did especially well working with the group at Unity I work with is that design and engineering are together in this cycle, so we're never separated. There's no kind of design on one side of the wall, engineering on the other side, and we're tipping things over, you know, kind of not knowing. I think I talked to the main development team like on a live Zoom call for a couple hours every day, just working together. So we applied this process and these principles to our daily work. We worked to define what we needed to do, the principles that would guide us, and the process of how we would do it. I'm going to share 2 examples of how we worked using the principles and the process. Then I'll share some of the biggest challenges we encountered along the way. So an example of one of these cycles is when we revisited control differentiation, which is a fancy term from not being able to tell a text field and a drop-down apart. Our first update was very flat. So modern apps are just going very flat. It's kind of this trendy thing. But of course, if you go too flat, that has usability implications, like control differentiation. It's not so obvious in a static design mock, so that's why we didn't work in that way I was talking about with the wall and the tipping things over. We actually worked in live builds, so we were designing in live builds and kind of looking at things and how they were working as we went. So when we identified that there were real usability issues as we got all this design work into the live build, we stopped and went back to the drawing board to make sure that we reintroduced some subtle shading and depth cues to make sure that we weren't going too flat and negatively impacting usability. So we also did a survey and we gathered data to validate these issues. So we got a lot of user comments back on the first survey about this, is what's really prompted us to go back and rethink our original design. So for the design and technical development, we did a complete set of design explorations. Here you can see just one little snapshot until we did this for like every control in Unity, right? We also did complete explorations in the editor. So if you can imagine, these styles sort of applied to different builds in the editor. So we did like hundreds, well, probably not hundreds, tens of different builds. We also did complete explorations in usability. So we ran surveys again. And then our goal was to improve usability while maintaining a modern and inspiring look and feel. This is a really delicate balance. Here you can see some of the variations in the inspector. Design and engineering worked together to figure out what we could technically do. Ultimately, we updated the design to include subtle depth cues to make the types of controls more instantly clear. So this is just one example. So another example I'm going to talk about is, oh, sorry, this is kind of the result. Sorry, I skipped the result. But the result is we implemented these changes into a build. We ran the same survey again, and we got much better results. So it's kind of a black and white, data-driven, situation. Not necessarily, does one particular important person like the first one better than the other. It was all of the users that participated on the online forums feedback. So the second problem I want to talk about is the issue of font selection, which for a desktop application is very tricky and difficult. The problem, our fonts were extremely old. So for example, Windows had moved on to use Segoe UI, but we were still using Verdana, which was an equivalent to MS Sans Serif that was used for Windows 98. So that was originally the font that was chosen for Unity, and we just hadn't updated it since then. And then the font also had a lot of bugs and readability issues. So it just looked very pixelated. It obviously wasn't created. It's not a modern font, so it's kind of created for an old OS. So we gathered survey data, again, more survey data, which pointed us to issues with font blurriness, particularly on low-res screens. And then moreover, it was contributing to the feedback that the editor was uninspiring and dated. So the font is everywhere. So when you kind of apply it across the entire editor, it makes a huge impact. So we evaluated many modern fonts on things like the render quality, the readability, the density, the letter form. And when a font has bad kerning pairs, so I kind of made this diagram, I'm hoping you can kind of see. So there's things like letter spacing on this diagram, But then really good fonts have what we call kerning pairs, so they don't have an equal distance between every single character. Some characters are actually pushed together a little closer, and other characters are given a little bit more breathing room. So you can imagine there's thousands of character combinations in a font, so really good fonts have thousands of customized kerning pairs. So what this means in Unity is you're going onto a 4K monitor or down to a really low res. Sometimes your fonts, like your Y might touch your P. Things might start to get blurry together. So that was a big concern. And then we also preferred a font with a good X height. So the X height there is kind of the top of that lowercase character. And so obviously when you're reading paragraph text like a long essay or a book or something like that, you want something where the capital letters are really pronounced so you can tell where the sentences begin. But in Unity, it's not an essay. You're reading labels, you're reading field descriptions. So what's more important is that you be able to see the largest text possible. So that means we want a taller X height so that those lowercase characters can be as big as possible, therefore making a really small 11-pixel font actually more readable than most 13-pixel fonts. So we initially tried Roboto. We did. It was a mistake. It was terrible on low-res screens because Roboto is a web font built for the web. And it's really meant to be used at a higher DPI. We had to step back, reevaluate our rendering requirements with the development team, and work with them to create a series of builds and test fonts and rendering options on all different types of platform screens and workstations. So I'm working in the Seattle office, and we have like a desk set up. I actually brought in a terrible monitor from home because I want to be able to repro like all of the really bad font situations that people were reporting, so we can really look at it and make sure that we're doing the best thing for the smaller screen. So ultimately, we selected the Inter typeface. Inter is a modern typeface designed for computer screens. It has good spacing and X height, it's highly legible, and it helps minimize eye fatigue. Additionally, it renders well across operating systems in all screen types, including both low and high DPI. Inter is also a really cool open source font, so if you're at all interested in typography, I'd go check out their webpage. They have a very collaborative, Unity-like process for creating the font. So we were met with many challenges. How can we develop and implement a new design system for an application with a long legacy of development? To solve this, we worked to design a long-term vision for the Unity editor, and then scoped out what we would do in the 19.3 timeframe to move towards that vision. The second large challenge was there was no way to easily retheme the product. So for example, if you wanted to change the text color, you would have to do it in several places. And first, you would have to find all of those places. Often teams would create hard-coded localized styles just so they knew where they were. So fixing the underlying theming system was crucial. To solve this, we developed a new system using USS, Unity Style Sheets, which is a subset of CSS functionality. We didn't want there to be confusion about what was allowed. This made styling, So in Unity CSS, we kind of disallow some CSS properties. The reason for this is performance, so we don't want to necessarily allow everything that you can do in CSS in the Unity editor UI, because it might slow us down a little bit, so that's the reason. And then this made styling easy to locate and clear to implement for our teams and the asset store developers. And probably the biggest area was how to improve the overall quality of the UI. We listened to requests and feedback. We implemented the theming work in many private beta builds, and we shared them with our users for feedback. We continued to iterate and refine to improve the quality of the UI, and we've actually continued doing that as we've been in beta. So here are some crazy numbers just to illustrate the work that we did. So we created over 5,000 icon assets. This actually just means around 600 to 700 individual icon concepts. And then, of course, you have to multiply that out for personal and pro theme, low DPI and high DPI. But it's still a lot. It's still a lot of icons. And then the development team moved and sorted through over 300 plus, it might be closer to 400, styles on the old UI. Many of these were redundant or hard-coded in areas, and they've been centralized down to one set of about 80 styles. And then we collected a ton of feedback and worked to incorporate over 400 different user suggestions and reported issues. We're still doing that, so the number goes up, the ticker goes up every day. So where are we now? We've not been able to fix everything yet, but we've made solid improvements in each of these areas. We made the software feel more modern by removing the dated-looking gradients while retaining subtle visual affordances to support interaction and the information architecture. We worked through countless design iterations to develop a look and feel that felt true to who we are now as a company. It's also been well received pretty much overall. Here's an example of a very positive user comment that we got on our latest blog post about this work. This is beautiful. The perfect UI UX. The designers deserve a huge raise. I didn't write this. Everyone should take inspiration from the UI. It reminds me a lot of the new Blender UI, which is a good thing. I wish Windows 10 looked similar. They should take inspiration from you. Okay, so this is ridiculously positive. I know, but a year ago, we were not getting comments like this on our original stages of work. So I really appreciate it. And then just to be fair, I included a more typical comment. Okay. So would be much better appreciated if you could be able to increase the font size of the GUI toolbar for the editor. Not just for the tabs. I'm working on a 4K screen in 4K res, and the toolbar is just too small. For you, you don't know what I'm talking about. It's the toolbar where you find file, edit, assets, etc. Please make it possible to increase that text as well. Thanks, Unity crew. So this is a great comment too, and I'd be really disappointed if I didn't have anything else to do. So that's pretty great. So here you can see kind of the new look of the toolbar we looked at earlier, talking about all of the different design changes there. So less shading, still obvious what's selected, looks a little bit more modern. For the issue of focus, over the last couple releases, we added the new Highlight Focus Blue toolbar. It's a really small change, but it actually helps a lot to retain kind of remembering which window you currently are in. And then we also added things like latent selection and hover states, which is super helpful as well. And then for the tiny 6-pixel font, we actually increased it to 11. So now all the drop-downs in Unity are the same text size as the rest of Unity. And so what's next? We have a lot of more improvements to make. We have a lot of workflows now to research, so usability across the entire editor. We need to focus more on accessibility. We need to continue to iterate and refine and improve the theming. We need to build common controls, so anybody who's seen the UI builder here at Unite, it's pretty awesome. We need to continue on work like this. And then we need to keep innovating. So keep thinking ahead what the editor will look like 3-5 years from now. So commonly asked questions. It's appropriately an elephant. Why isn't the dark theme available to all users? So we hear this daily. Users have given us this feedback at every stage of this project. Users have given the feedback that they want the dark theme to be free and available in the personal version of Unity. Many users prefer this theme, but additionally, many users find it easier to use and more accessible. As a user experience designer, I want what my users want and need, so you guys. I collect this feedback every time. I include it in every design recommendation. So please keep that feedback coming. And then next, why spend engineering time on this? So we get quotes like this. So I empathize with this kind of feedback. But I want people to understand that it's not always a clear trade-off of one feature over another. And we felt like after 14 years and countless UX-related problems, it was time to put a little effort into ensuring that the editor was a product that users would open up and use and be excited about. So why hasn't my feedback been addressed? I assure you, if you've given us feedback on the forums, even the super negative and the super positive, we've read it. We just haven't gotten a chance to respond to everybody. But we do log everything, and if an issue comes up several times over different forums, we do fix it. So we're kind of taking a more data-driven approach. But please always keep the feedback coming, because that's how we've been able to improve the work. And then the last one, why flat design? So we wanted to provide Unity users with a modern and professional editor experience that feels inspiring, well-crafted, and trustworthy, but still familiar. So to do this, we spent time examining all the modern applications people use alongside Unity. A lot of feedback we received about the dated look included comparisons to such products. For these reasons, we ultimately designed the user interface to be consistent and aligned with industry standards, and current trends are leaning towards this more modern and flat style. So these are all the ways that you can plug in and give us your thoughts. If you want to snap a quick screenshot of this, or a picture on your phone. This is my last one. I've got to wrap it up, guys. Yeah. And then I wanted to say thanks. We've done most of this work hand in hand with users and user feedback. All our improvements and refinements have been done based on people's comments in the forums and participation in our surveys and user studies. And we could not have done this without the Unity users. So thank you so much.